When my mother-in-law whispered something in my husband's ear, his face twisted with anger. Without warning, he yanked my hair and landed a hard punch to my face. I collapsed, dazed and terrified. Desperate for help, I called the police. But when they arrived, I was horrified to find that the officer was a friend of my husband. My heart sank as he dismissed my pleas, claiming I had no proof. With my immediate safety compromised and feeling utterly alone, I knew I needed a new plan. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I still remember the first day I brought my daughter Lily home from the hospital. The joy was overwhelming, but so was the exhaustion. I'm Isabella, 30 years old, trying to adjust to the whirlwind of motherhood. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and trying to keep up with the chaos that had taken over our home in Austin, Texas. The house was often a mess, with laundry piling up and the kitchen in a constant state of disarray. David, my husband, was working long hours, and I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. One particularly stressful afternoon, as I struggled to soothe Lily's cries, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. I looked around at the untidy residence, feeling a pang of shame. I hadn't had a chance to clean up, and the sight of the dirty kitchen only added to my stress. When I opened the door, there stood Margaret, David's mother. She was a force to be reckoned with, her presence commanding attention the moment she arrived. "Well, look at this," Margaret said, stepping inside with a critical eye. "I see things haven't improved much since the last time I visited." I tried to muster a smile, but it felt strained. "Hi, Margaret. I'm just a bit overwhelmed with everything right now." Margaret's gaze swept over the living room, taking in the scattered toys and the pile of dishes in the kitchen. "Overwhelmed? It looks more like you've given up. Is this really how you plan to raise my granddaughter?" Her words stung, but I tried to stay calm. "I'm doing my best. It's just been a lot to handle." Margaret's disapproval was palpable as she walked into the kitchen and raised an eyebrow at the state of it. "This place is a mess. How can you expect to manage anything if you can't even keep the house clean?" I felt my cheeks flush with humiliation. David's work schedule left me to handle everything on my own, and while I was trying, it was clear it wasn't enough for Margaret. The front door opened, and David walked in, his face lighting up when he saw his mother. "Mom, what a surprise. I didn't know you were coming by." Margaret immediately seized the opportunity. "David, just look at this. Your wife can't even manage to keep the house in order. It's like she's completely lost control." David's face fell as he glanced around, taking in the messy state of our home. "Isabella, we need to talk about this. I know things are tough, but you have to prioritize better." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "David, I'm trying. It's not as easy as it looks." Margaret, ever the instigator, chimed in. "Being a mother is about more than just caring for the baby. It's about responsibility and managing your household." David's gaze shifted between his mother and me, his expression conflicted. "Mom, maybe we should try to help her understand what's at stake here." "Help her understand?" Margaret's voice grew sharper. "She needs to learn discipline. She's not living up to our family standards." The tension in the room was palpable. David, who usually stood by me, was now looking at me with a mixture of frustration and confusion. "Sophie, you need to get your act together. This isn't acceptable." Before I could respond, Margaret stepped closer to David, whispering something in his ear. David's face hardened, and he looked back at me with an unreadable expression. "Maybe you're right," he said reluctantly. "Maybe you need to learn the hard way." I felt my heart drop as David moved toward me. In a shocking burst of anger, he grabbed my hair and yanked it painfully. Before I could react, he threw a hard punch to my face. The force of it set me reeling, and I staggered back, clutching my cheek as tears streamed down my face. I could barely process what had just happened. The pain was sharp, but the sense of betrayal was even worse. Lily, who had been quiet during the confrontation, began to cry, adding to my overwhelming distress. Desperation set in, and I reached for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. When the police officer arrived, I hoped for some relief. But my heart sank when I realized he was an old friend of David's. His demeanor was calm and dismissive as he listened to my report. "I'm afraid I can't do much without solid evidence," he said, glancing at David. "There's not enough here to act on." I was stunned. The officer who should have been my ally was siding with David. But he hit me. "Can't you do anything?" The officer shook his head. "Without clear proof, there's nothing I can do. Maybe next time try to gather more evidence before calling us." He left, leaving me feeling even more isolated. I looked at David, who had a cold, indifferent look on his face. Margaret stood beside him, her expression one of smug satisfaction. The sense of betrayal from both David and the officer left me feeling utterly alone. As the door closed behind the officer, I sank to the floor, cradling Lily in my arms. The house that was supposed to be my home now felt like a prison. The physical pain from the punch was nothing compared to the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. This was the moment when I realized that my life had become something I couldn't tolerate. I knew I needed to make a change, but the road ahead seemed daunting. David's behavior under Margaret's influence had crossed a line that could never be undone. I needed to find a way out, not just for myself, but for my daughter as well. In the midst of the chaos and despair, I made a silent vow to myself. I would find a way to escape this nightmare and build a life where Lily and I could be safe and happy. This was only the beginning of a journey that would test my strength and resilience in ways I never imagined. The days that followed the attack were some of the hardest I had ever faced. I was deeply shaken, but the physical and emotional pain from David's violence were overshadowed by a stronger feeling: determination. I knew I had to get out. I had to protect Lily and find a way to escape the toxic environment David and Margaret had created. But how? It wasn't until a few days later that I found a glimmer of hope. Rachel, my old friend from college, had always been someone I could rely on. I reached out to her, hoping she could offer guidance. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to burden her with my problems, but desperation gave me the courage to call. "Rachel, it's Isabella. I need your help," I said, my voice trembling as I spoke into the phone. "Things have gotten really bad. David hit me. The police didn't help, and I'm afraid to stay here any longer." Rachel's response was immediate and filled with concern. "Isabella, I'm so sorry you're going through this. I'm an investigator now. I can help you. Let's meet and talk about what you need." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop. When I walked in, Rachel was already there, looking as composed as ever. I sat down across from her, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. "So, what's the plan?" Rachel asked, her eyes steady and focused. I took a deep breath. "I need to leave David, but I can't do it without proof of what's happening. I need to gather evidence to show that his behavior is abusive and that Margaret's control over him is a big part of it." Rachel nodded. "We'll need to document everything. Do you have any recordings, messages, or evidence of the abuse?" I shook my head. "I don't, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Rachel's face softened with sympathy. "We'll start by gathering as much evidence as we can. We'll need to document your interactions with David and Margaret, and if you can, try to record any instances of abuse or manipulation." Over the next few weeks, Rachel and I worked tirelessly. Rachel showed me how to use a hidden recording app on my phone to capture conversations and incidents. I recorded phone calls, text messages, and even began documenting my daily interactions with David and Margaret. I was careful not to draw their suspicion while doing this, which was challenging given how closely they were monitoring me. One day, Margaret called me while David was at work. I answered the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hello, Margaret." "Isabella," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "David told me you've been causing trouble. I've been very patient, but it's clear you need to be reminded of your place." I recorded the entire conversation, capturing her manipulative tone and the way she spoke about David and me. It was disturbing to hear her undermine my efforts as a mother and wife. But it was crucial evidence. Rachel and I also planned for my eventual departure. We mapped out a strategy to leave when David was at work, ensuring that he wouldn't be around to stop me. Rachel helped me organize a safe place to stay temporarily, making sure Lily and I would have somewhere secure to go once we left. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. The decision to leave was not just about escaping David's physical abuse, but about breaking free from the suffocating control Margaret had over our lives. I knew that this step would be dangerous and challenging, but I had to do it for Lily's sake. The day of our planned departure came, and I felt a knot of fear and excitement in my stomach. David was supposed to be at work, and Rachel had agreed to meet me at the house to help with the move. I spent the morning packing a few essentials, trying to stay calm and focused. As I was about to leave, I received a text from Rachel. "I'm outside. Are you ready?" My heart raced as I quickly gathered Lily and our things. I took one last look at the house that had been both a home and a prison. The clutter, the mess, it all symbolized the chaos and control that had plagued our lives. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the door, locking it behind me. Rachel and I loaded everything into her car and drove to her house. The journey was quiet, but filled with unspoken relief. I knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, but I also knew that there was still a long way to go. The road ahead was uncertain, but I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in a long while. Once we arrived at Rachel's house, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. We unloaded our things and settled in. Rachel offered comfort and support, reminding me that this was just the first step in our plan. In the days that followed, Rachel and I focused on collecting more evidence and preparing for the next phase. We knew that exposing David and Margaret's abuse would be crucial for our case. I was determined to see this through, no matter how challenging it might be. Rachel's support was invaluable, and her expertise as an investigator was a lifeline during this turbulent time. Together, we prepared for the crucial task of building a solid case against David and Margaret, knowing that our efforts required clear, detailed evidence to present. We also focused on documenting every instance of David's abusive behavior. Rachel advised me to reach out to any family members or friends who might have witnessed Margaret's controlling ways or had seen David's violent tendencies. One of David's cousins, who had always been sympathetic towards me, agreed to speak up. She provided a written statement detailing her observations of David's aggressive behavior and Margaret's interference in our marriage. With the evidence compiled, Rachel and I began to organize our presentation. We knew that simply having evidence wasn't enough. We needed to present it in a way that would be convincing and comprehensive. We categorized the materials into several key areas: abuse incidents, manipulation by Margaret, and David's erratic behavior. Rachel helped me prepare a detailed report summarizing each piece of evidence and its significance. We included timestamps and context for the recordings, ensuring that everything was as clear and precise as possible. It was a daunting task, but it was necessary to build a strong case. One day, Rachel and I met with a lawyer who specialized in domestic abuse cases. She reviewed our evidence and gave us crucial advice on how to proceed. "You have a solid case," she said, flipping through the documents and listening to the recordings. "But we need to ensure that everything is presented clearly. I'll help you file a restraining order and press charges." Her words were a beacon of hope. Knowing that we had legal support to back us up was incredibly reassuring. We worked with her to prepare the necessary paperwork and ensure that all our evidence was in order. The day of the court hearing arrived, and my nerves were frayed. Rachel and I walked into the courthouse, carrying the weight of our efforts and the hope for justice. The atmosphere was tense, and I could feel the gravity of the situation pressing down on me. Rachel stayed by my side, providing support and encouragement as we awaited our turn. When it was finally time to present our case, I felt a surge of adrenaline and fear. The evidence was overwhelming, and Rachel's legal expertise guided us through the process. We played the recordings, presented the documents, and shared the testimonies from David's cousin and other witnesses. The courtroom was quiet as the evidence unfolded. I could see the judge's reaction as he listened to the recordings and reviewed the evidence. It was a nerve-wracking experience, but I knew that this was the culmination of all our hard work. As the hearing concluded, the judge's decision was imminent. Rachel and I waited anxiously for the verdict. It was a tense time, but I was hopeful that the evidence would be enough to secure a positive outcome. The days following the hearing were filled with anticipation. Finally, we received the news we had been waiting for. The judge had ruled in our favor. David and Margaret would face legal consequences for their actions. It was a significant victory, but I knew that there was still much work to be done. Rachel and I continued to work on securing my new apartment and finalizing our plans. The legal victory was just one step in our journey toward rebuilding a safe and independent life. With the support of Rachel and the legal system, I felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. In reflecting on these events, I realized that the fight for justice had been a transformative experience. It had tested my strength, resilience, and resolve. But with each step forward, I grew more confident in my ability to overcome the challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. With the court ruling in our favor, Rachel and I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The evidence we had so painstakingly gathered had paid off, but the final step, seeing David and Margaret held accountable, was still ahead of us. The time had come to involve the authorities and ensure that justice was served. Rachel and I worked closely with our lawyer to coordinate with the police. We compiled a comprehensive dossier of evidence, including recordings, texts, and witness statements, and handed it over to the authorities. Rachel's expertise and my first-hand accounts made our case as robust as possible. On the day of the arrest, my heart raced with a mixture of fear and hope. David and Margaret were still unaware of what was coming, and I was nervous about how they would react. Rachel stayed by my side, providing support and helping me stay focused. The police arrived at David and Margaret's house in the afternoon. I watched from a distance, my emotions a tangled mess of anxiety and anticipation. Rachel had advised me to stay away from the scene for my safety and to avoid any direct confrontation. From what I could see, the officers were taking their time as they approached the house. It was an agonizing wait. Finally, after what felt like hours, Rachel received a call from one of the officers. David and Margaret had been arrested. The weight of the news was almost overwhelming. The long, painful journey to this point had finally reached its climax, and the people who had tormented me were now facing consequences for their actions. That evening, as the sun set over Austin, I felt a profound sense of closure. It wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about reclaiming my life and asserting my right to safety and respect. With David and Margaret facing charges, I could finally start to think about my future without the shadow of their abuse looming over me. In the days that followed, I worked on settling into my new apartment with my daughter. The move was physically and emotionally exhausting, but it also symbolized a new beginning. I took great care in setting up our home to be a peaceful and nurturing environment for my daughter. It was important for me to create a space where we could heal and start anew. Rachel continued to be a steadfast friend and supporter. She helped me navigate the complexities of my new life and ensured that I had access to the resources and support I needed. Her presence was a constant reminder of the strength that had carried me through this ordeal. The legal process continued, and I stayed updated on the proceedings. David and Margaret's court dates were set, and I was prepared to testify if necessary. The legal system would hold them accountable for their abusive behavior, and I was determined to see it through. As I looked back on the journey, I was struck by the incredible support I had received from Rachel and the legal system. Their help had been instrumental in breaking free from the cycle of abuse and beginning a new chapter in my life. It was a reminder of the importance of resilience, courage, and seeking support when facing adversity. The day David and Margaret were officially charged was a bittersweet moment. I felt a sense of justice being served, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the impact of their actions would linger. Nonetheless, the legal consequences they faced were a crucial step in holding them accountable and ensuring that they could no longer inflict harm on anyone else. As I settled into my new life, I reflected on the strength it took to confront and overcome such a deeply painful situation. The support of friends, the legal victories, and my own determination had all played a vital role in helping me rebuild my life. I was now in a place where I could focus on creating a positive and loving environment for my daughter, free from the shadow of abuse and manipulation. In the end, my journey was a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of standing up against abuse. With each day that passed, I felt stronger and more capable of facing the future